Hello and welcome to this podcast from the BBC World Service. Please let us know what you think and tell other people about us on social media. Podcasts from the BBC World Service are supported by advertising.
On Saturday, the 8th of March 2014, flight MH370, a scheduled flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing loaded with 239 passengers, tragically went missing over the Indian Ocean. Now, I remember quite vividly at how the enormous difficulty in finding any wreckage or sign of the plane by the search and rescue teams that were deployed quickly became international news, as ships and aircraft sought to locate MH370 and find out what happened. But imagine instead if we could send out a team of flying search robots that could glide effortlessly over the waves, covering vast distances with minimal energy. Well, in the future, that might just be possible. And it's all thanks to one of nature's most astonishing feats of aerial evolution, the wandering albatross. When I think of animals that are truly masters of the skies, the wandering albatross is easily a strong contender for the top spot. They are enormous seabirds with the largest recorded wingspan of any bird, reaching up to a massive 3.5 meters across, which is about the same length as a small car. Plus, its wings are uniquely adapted to soar thousands of miles with minimum effort. Given that albatross nest on remote islands and spend several years of their adult life out at sea, many of us are unlikely to have seen one in the flesh. But if you can picture something that looks a bit like an overgrown seagull with a large pink bill and pink feet, then you're on the right track. For centuries, the albatross has captured the imagination of artists, poets, writers, but more recently, these graceful birds have caught the attention of scientists and have served as the inspiration for a new flying machine. Hello and welcome back to 30 Animals That Made Us Smarter, an original podcast from the BBC World Service, which reveals how animals like the blue mussel, firefly and woodpecker, which have all featured in previous episodes, have been helping us out with some really challenging design problems. This process of designing materials and structures that are modeled on biological systems is called biomimicry, and I think it's such a cool area of study. For those of you that are new to the podcast, I'm Patrick Iye, and you can find out more details about the series on our website, bbcworldservice.com/30animals. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. If you haven't done that already, please take a few seconds to do it right now. Just open up the app and click subscribe. It means you don't have to worry about downloading them manually. It all happens automatically each time a new podcast is released. Easy. Right, let's get to it. In this episode, number 14, Albatross and Drone, we'll be hearing how a team of researchers has been studying the wandering albatross to help them design a drone that flies by harnessing the power of both the wind and the water. Wandering albatross spend most of their lives gliding over the waves, only coming back to solid ground in order to breed. Their range stretches from subtropical waters to the planet's southerly extremes, with important breeding colonies on Prince Edward Island in South Africa and on the Antarctic island of South Georgia. Because of their inherent connection to the sea, in the past, albatross were seen and caught regularly by sailors who would eat their meat and use their long wing bones to make tobacco pipe stems. But not all were so forgiving of the practice, as English poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge describes in his poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, published in 1798. It tells a tale of bad luck striking a ship when one of the crew, the ancient mariner, shoots and kills an albatross. The crew resort to hanging the dead albatross around the neck of the mariner to remind him of his guilt in killing an innocent bird. On the other side of the planet, the Maori people of New Zealand, also inspired by the power of the albatross, used its down and underwing feathers as signs of rank. They decorated their war canoes with albatross feathers as a sort of blessing, in the hope that the bird's prowess at sea would be passed on to the sailors. They also hunted them for food and made flutes and tattooing chisels from their wing bones. But it was Carl Linnaeus, a Swedish botanist, physician and zoologist, who's best known as the father of binomial nomenclature, which is the way we go about naming different species, who first described these birds in 1758. He gave them the name Diomedia exulans. The first part of the name Diomedia refers to Diomedes, a hero in Greek mythology whose companions were transformed into birds by the goddess Venus. Exulans comes from the Latin for exile or wanderer and highlights the bird's extraordinary voyages across the open ocean. It's long been known that some albatross could indeed travel great distances, but it was only once we were able to tag them with satellite tracking devices that we discovered just how far. A brilliant example of this came about in 1989, when it was found that a male wandering albatross breeding in the Crozet Islands in the South Indian Ocean would go on feeding trips of about 15,000 kilometers between incubation shifts. I'll say that again. 15,000 kilometers on a single trip. That's the equivalent of flying from New York all the way down to the South Pole. And over the course of a single year, some individuals have managed to circumnavigate the Southern Ocean 3 times. That's a distance of over 120,000 kilometers. Their efforts become even more impressive when you consider how the distances that albatross can fly would come at a huge energetic cost for most other birds, meaning they would need to eat far more food. But somehow, the albatross is able to stay aloft, skillfully gliding through the air with barely a wing beat. And it's this ability which has fascinated scientists. Imagine if we could design a machine that could fly in a similar way. Well, looking back through the history books, their capacity to fly into prevailing wind also caught the attention of the 17th century merchant trader, traveller and writer Peter Mundy. He was struck by how albatross were able to glide so effortlessly close to the water without flapping their wings. It set him thinking about how indeed some ships did better when they sailed in a similar fashion. He wondered if the answer might lie in the way the wind struck the slightly curved underside of the bird's wing, and likewise the curved hollow formed by the ship's sail. Sometime later in the early 19th century, French sea captain Jean-Marie Le Bris became fascinated by the flying skills of the albatross he saw on his travels. He went about carefully studying those that had been captured and killed. Using them as the basis for his own model, he constructed and flew 2 lightweight gliders, referred to as l'albatrosse artificielle, the artificial albatross. In the early 20th century, American ornithologist Robert Cushman Murphy made the same connection. Watching albatross fly in a South Atlantic gale, he wrote, "When the secret of their perfect balance has been learned and applied to man-made planes, then we'll go a-flying." So we know these birds range over huge areas of the Southern Ocean and regularly circle the globe as they forage for food, and that a number of people have been inspired by their flying efficiency. But until recently, we didn't know how they were able to fly thousands of miles on such minimal energy. Well, the albatross's secret comes down to something called dynamic soaring, where the bird actually harnesses the energy of the wind to glide long distances without flapping its wings. It's able to do this and save on energy through 2 adaptations. Firstly, special tendons allow the bird to save energy by locking its wings open. And secondly, the albatross uses what's called a dynamic flight pattern, a sort of zigzag over the waves to surf the strong winds that are common over the ocean. By gliding at an angle of about 90 degrees to the wind, the albatross gains lift and begins rising up to about 15 meters. At the top of its crest, the bird turns slightly in the direction of the wind and then coasts effortlessly downward until it nears the surface of the water. Turning again into the wind, the bird soars upward once more, and the cycle repeats. Gabrielle Bousquet, a former graduate student in mechanical engineering at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in the United States of America, used a computer model to analyze albatross flight patterns with his colleagues. It turns out that by making these gentle zigzag motions as they climb and descend, drag is greatly reduced, which helps the albatross to fly more efficiently. And something else which may come as a surprise is how the bird's coloration is thought to play a role. Like many other seabirds, albatross are black on top with white bellies. It was recently shown that black feathers absorb more solar energy. And when the darker feathers heat up, this temperature difference lowers the air pressure on the upper surfaces of the bird's wing. That in itself creates additional lift, allowing the birds to fly through the air more easily. Inspired by these birds, Bousquet and his team have been working on a robotic glider that can skim along the water's surface, riding the wind like an albatross, while also surfing the waves like a sailboat. As Bousquet points out, if you can fly like an albatross when it's really windy, and then use your keel to sail like a boat when it's not, then this dramatically expands the kinds of regions you can go to. With that in mind, let's turn our attention to sailboats, which propel themselves through the water by taking momentum from the wind with their sails and transfer it into the water by pushing back with their keel. Bousquet wondered if they could design a vehicle that could operate in both the sea and in the air. He wanted to combine the high-speed qualities and energy efficiency designs of both the sailboat and the albatross. The team drafted a design for a hybrid vehicle which resembled a glider with a 3-meter wingspan, similar to that of a typical albatross. They added a tall triangular sail and a slender wing-like keel. According to their calculations, the wind-powered vehicle would only need relatively calm winds of about 5 knots or roughly 9 kilometers an hour in order to zip across the water at speeds of about 20 knots or 37 kilometers an hour. The team built a prototype and showed that their idea for a vehicle which could be powered by both air and water had real potential. Bousquet hopes that in the near future, compact, speedy robotic water skimmers could be used by research teams to survey large areas of the ocean. Now, as I mentioned earlier, that might be to locate a wreckage, lead search and rescue efforts, or to patrol marine protected areas to make sure no one's illegally fishing in them. Another application could see them used in remote locations like Antarctica and the surrounding Southern Ocean, where the need for electricity to charge batteries and power other electronics comes at a premium. It's an area that's difficult to access, but the artificial albatross could be used instead of traditional drones to remotely collect valuable data such as carbon dioxide exchange across the region. This is something we know little about and could help inform climate change measurements. Using them to collect atmospheric data could also prove helpful to meteorologists and help them better predict the paths of powerful hurricanes and storms. Just picture it. Vast fleets of albatross gliders moving up and down, in and out of the waves, quietly gathering scientific information. It would be a beautiful, environmentally friendly way to survey the planet's oceans, and albatross gliders might even have real albatross keeping them company. In number 15 of 30 Animals That Made Us Smarter, an original podcast from the BBC World Service, we'll be discovering how sharks might hold the key in preventing potentially life-threatening infections from spreading in our hospitals. As we leave the albatross, remember you can find a list of sources of information for this episode on our website, bbcworldservice.com/30animals. And if you've got a few seconds to spare, send in your comments and let your friends know about the series. The hashtag is 30animals. Thanks for listening.